we cannot say probably good afternoon or good morning or wherever you are. And we are really happy to have you in this discussion. And it is my honor to introduce our distinguished, and prominent panelists in this team that we're trying to tackle or impact. First, I would like to give you guys a little, I have to frame the discussion. As you all know, Ethiopia, the last close to 4 years, there was a euphoric moment after Dr. Abiy, took the power. Everybody thought that the situation, there was a lot of good things that was happening. Those who were arrested, they were freed. Those who were, our, ONLF and other organizations, they came back to the country. Overall, we were hoping to head it to some kind of democratic governance and rule for Ethiopia for the first time. However, all that dashed. And then the question that we are asking ourselves right now is to look at it deeply, with these expert panelists, what went wrong? So to tackle that issue, and also particularly Ethiopia, right now we have a civil war that is going on. The main one is in the northern part, but also in general, all the region except the Somali region, it's affected by this civil war. So without further ado, I would like to first welcome, and as I said earlier, it is my honor to introduce Dr. David Sheen. Dr. David Sheen is a professor at George Washington, and also he has had 4 decades diplomatic and other credential that is, I cannot go through here. Otherwise, it will be more than 1 hour. So briefly here, I will say he has an insight, and knowledge, and he's a seasoned diplomat on the Horn of Africa. Mr. David Sheen, my first question to you is, what went wrong and what is the root cause of this civil war?
First, it's important, I think, to point out that different Ethiopians are going to have a different opinion as to what went wrong or what did not go wrong. There will be those who will continue to argue that all has not gone wrong. But I think clearly the one element that has not worked out as everyone had hoped is the whole question of ethnic relations in the country, which have always been troubled, but seem to have become particularly troubled in the last couple of years. And where there was hope that ethnic relations would improve throughout the country, they clearly did not in the case of Tigray region, but also in terms of other parts of Ethiopia too. So the whole ethnic question has become more complicated, more strained, if you will. And I think that is what Ethiopia in large part is dealing with today, trying to figure out how does it move forward from here when the ethnic relations are so strained.
So some of scholars are arguing that the crisis of Ethiopia is along the line of these 2 schools of thoughts that are fighting, namely the unitary states and the federalists. Can you shed light on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that is something of an oversimplification of how different ideological groups in Ethiopia see the future, but I think in a very general way that is probably accurate. It's a question of whether you have a governing system with power highly concentrated in Addis Ababa, or whether you have a governing system with a great deal of authority in the federal regions. But then when you talk about federalism, you have to define terms. Is one talking about ethnic federalism, geographical federalism, federalism based on some other standard. And I'm not sure there's any agreement on that at the moment. In recent history, one has talked about ethnic federalism because that is what was established during the EPRDF government. But that is not necessarily the way federalism would have to look in a country like Ethiopia. And then there's the question of how much power do the regions have? They're all different kinds of federalism. And I haven't seen any clear definition as to how people see the different kinds of federalism. So I would agree that these are the two primary schools of thought, and they're very, very different approaches to governance. But when you get particularly to federalism, I don't see much detail or definition yet.
Before we move on to the other question, this will be my last one. As you can see, Dr. David, the constitution, the current constitution in Ethiopia, there is not a lot of arguments. We can say even it's a classical, but a lot of people argue that the implementation part is not there. When you look the crisis right now that is going on between the government and also the regional state of Tigray that opted to hold an election, do you think that which one is, in your perspective, has the correct point of view?
I'm not sure that either one has the correct point of view at this point. I think that on the one hand, the Tigrayans were doing what they felt they had to do in order to preserve themselves by opting for a significant amount of autonomy. There arguably were other ways to go about this other than going forward with a regional election. But from the Tigrayan point of view, they didn't see any other options, and one can perhaps understand why they chose that route. You then had the central government take the position that this was totally unacceptable and tried to crush that effort. Initially had some success at crushing it, although ultimately did not succeed with that. But you could argue that there were mistakes made on both sides of this question. And I think that's sort of where I come out, that I don't see complete righteousness on either the Addis Ababa side or the Mekelle side.
Now we have fortunate to also honor Professor or the chairman of Ogaden National Liberation Front, Abdurrahman Madi. Abdurrahman, welcome to our program, and we are really happy to have you here. My first question to you is also, in your perspective, as you know, you have been in this struggle for more than 50 years, if I'm not mistaken. Ethiopia, throughout the history, Menelik, Haile Selassie, Mengistu, right now, always, ever since the nation state was formed, they were ruling by the barrel, by the gun. What's your perspective? What do you think the root cause of Ethiopian problem with respect of power?
I greet the panelists and the Honorable, David Sheen, whom I've known for quite a while, and who is an avid, follower of Ethiopian affairs. And the issue of Ethiopia is very complex, as he said. It's very simplistic only to say that there are two camps of the federalists or ethnic federalists and the unionists, and some new voices saying federalism. But I think the paradigm in Ethiopia, which the whole state setup has from the beginning been, flawed. The problem is before even you reach about what type of state people will benefit from, there's a question always, what is the role of the state? What does the state mean? In the olden days, states were formed to protect their own people, to serve the people, and to create, a security for its people. It evolved, if you look at the Leviathan, all those theories of statehood from empire to empire to imperialism to even religious states, whatever. In the 21st century, where now we are in the 21st, 22nd century, the model of state today will not be expected to be what it was in 2,000 years ago, or maybe 1,500 or 300 years ago. The world has moved forward, and the problem is the Ethiopian state itself, the way it's built, the way it works, is very flawed, because it's always built on one party rule, one group, one nation, always hegemonizing the rest. So unless that idea goes away and there is a state that represents all voices where the dialogue can happen, then the future of the people can be, worked out. The problem with Ethiopia has always been one group taking the rule, whether they are communists or whether they are nationalists, whether they are ethnic group, whatever it is, whatever the rationale. But there's always a dictatorial system of a state that always has a very, very good rhetoric, and especially for the last 20, 30 years, 40 years, and all this beautiful constitution, all these, liberation, all this revolutionizing. There are different languages they always use, but the crux of the matter is a one-party state has destroyed Ethiopia, or one nation state. Ethiopia is a multinational, multicultural, with different ethnic groups, different religious groups, and the old way will not work there anymore. Unfortunately, what I always repeat itself again, one group trying to dominate the rest, and there's no proper dialogue. When people come together in a genuine way, when there's not one group dictating the future of the other nations, then there's a way people can agree on whatever system they can come together and live together with. But the crisis starts from there. And always there's a theory and some logic behind it that always justifies that dictatorial state. And that's what comes, for example, as we said, 2018 was a watershed. 1991 was all the same. There's a lot of promises, there's a lot of hope. People come together, armed groups, come to put down their arms, and what happens? And then the same old story starts. So what we say, there's a fundamental flaw in the way Ethiopian state is set up. And the current state of affairs is also the same, with different faces, with different names. I don't blame any particular person, but it's all story again. One group trying to hegemonize the rest. For example, when we come back, we were promised to have a freedom of expression, free elections, the right to decide our future. Of course, we have got very strong views about federalism, about the self-determination of peoples. We know also there are other countries that have got very strong views about that, but we never got the chance to come together and discuss it and reach a way that we can sort it out. There was only EPRF was dismantled, and then another group took over, one party rule, now PP, and everything was just the same story. And on top of that, whatever had been, also the war in the north has also brought a new dimension to it. Because, for example, for us, we rejected the war. We said we have seen wars. There is no solution for war. Nothing will come from wars. If we want to sort out our problems, we should come together and sit and dialogue. So, for example, before the coming elections, before those wars, me and our and other parties suggested a national dialogue before the elections. We were ignored. The war was fought. There's a talk of national dialogue from the government. Well, okay, we accepted. We said, okay, let's just try it and see how things will be sorted out. The problem comes again to the same thing. Some people are excluded. Some sections of this nation are excluded. Some are in prison. Some there's in areas fighting. And the ruling party with its parliament just dictated new rules and then chose, the commission unilaterally. And then what it means always, there is no space for different ideas to come together to sort it out. And unless that paradigm changes, unless everyone in Ethiopia realizes that no single group, no single nation, no single ideology will work out, unless we all come together and sort it out, there's no hope for this country. And we are very sorry about that. We live in the 21st century. We live in an area where we need to even move bigger than African little states. But we are still quagmire in these all paradigms again and again. One group hijacking power and trying to impose on it, other groups reacting to it. When there's an argument about it, resorting to violence, and the other group resorts to violence. So we are back to cycle number one. So I'm very much worried that we will go back again to the same cycles. But I hope, with the help of the international community, with some reasoning from the leadership, especially Abiy, who now leads the Ethiopian government, They have to reconsider and think seriously about the future of this country, and it won't go the way it's now. It will not take us anywhere. That's my view, actually. That's the way I see the problem. It's a whole setup in Ethiopia. There is no place anymore for a one-party rule in this world. We live in a democratic, we live in the social village. We live in a global village now today. We live in an area where all the world are merging. We are coming together, ideas are moving around. The people now in the Ogaden villages, I went to the most hinterland village. They've got mobiles and they're watching the internet. They're listening to ideas. The state doesn't control the idea, it's free. So you cannot keep, people hegemonizing people or making the state, own the people. That's what I always say. We need a state that's owned by the people. We don't need anymore a state that owns the people. And that's where the problem is, according to my view.
Mr. Abdurrahman, as you say, eloquently, as we know, the Ethiopian government, especially led by Abiy and other leaders, a lot of, they make a metaphor these days. They're saying that they were seeking, to restore empire, but they lost the state. So we all know that. But one thing I notice to the international community is how on earth in any other region in Ethiopia, namely, in Tigray, in Amara region, in Benishangul, in Afar, the war, is raging. But in the Somali region, that was considered a place of war all the time, we can see is the only, an oasis of peace. We can see that. How do you, especially your organization in ONLF, bring that peace in that area?
By two sides, ONLF initially, and also the Ethiopian government, because we decided to stop the war on both sides. And we have been working for the last 3 years to maintain that peace. It was our decision to non-violence, to seek our rights through non-violent means, through the political means. Unfortunately, to be frank with you, it has been our effort. We have been the people who have been patient, who have been, accepting unacceptables. Our Liberation Army rehabilitation was ignored. Our agreement was ignored. Whatever we agreed with the federal government was ignored. And the regional government does whatever it wants with us. We have been just falling back, accepting everything, because we saw and we still believe peace is the only way forward for the people in Horn of Africa, for Ethiopia, for Somalia, for everyone. We have been killing each other for almost a century. And we try to give chance of peace. That was why there was no war in the Somali state or Ogaden. And it was our effort, day and night, to accept even humiliation, to accept what we have been done, to accept division, to accept harassment, putting into prison, everything. We said no. We didn't want peace, and still we still maintain that we still are very much adhere to that non-violent means. But it's getting very hard day by day. We don't have a partner on the other side, either on the regional level or on the federal level. They're ignoring us. They are not listening to our concerns. They have stolen the election in our land, and now there's raging drought, tantamount to famine. And they're actually wiggling around. They're not publicly declaring, advocating for it. The parliament accepted several billion for the war. And what did they do for the people dying in the drought? Just peanuts. So we are not the priority. The Somali people, that's what we feel. They don't see us, since they think we are periphery, they can ignore our rights, but it's no longer that. We are no longer isolated. We are now collaborating with the coalition with other Ethiopians, because we have come to realize the oppression is not only on us, it's on Oromos, it's on Sidamas, it's on Benishangul, it's on Agao, it's on southern groups. So what we know is we are part of this larger setup that wants a new beginning in Ethiopia. And so we are in a much more stronger position than we were fighting. So we believe peace is very important, and we'll keep to that, but we don't have a partner in peace actually. But it's also our effort. 99% of the peace in the Somali state came from ONLF desisting from any violence, whatever happened to them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Madde. Now I'm moving to also, it's my great honor also to introduce our sister, Hafsa Abdi. Hafsa, welcome to our program. Hafsa is a founder of Mandek, and also she is working diligently to empower women. she has also a lived experience in terms of methodology and any other kind of experience that she has had in the sustainable development and empower the rural area. Mr. Hafs, sorry, I said Mr. Mrs. Hafsa, can you also speak out to the root cause of this problem in your perspective, and also from the, if you see from the angle of women?
In terms of what's happening right now in Ethiopia, I believe that Ethiopia doesn't have just a political crisis. It has a societal, economical, religious, and most of all, moral crisis. This has been going on since the inception of Ethiopia as a country and has exploded in real time in the last year and a half. From a woman's perspective, I believe a national dialogue being primarily administered by those committing current atrocities, or a dialogue excluding the voices of Somali people, Oromo people, Ament people, Tigrayan people, and other disenfranchised people is not a dialogue. It is a monologue being conducted by monsters, in my opinion. And that sort of dialogue will only result in more catastrophe and violence in the factor, at least from a woman's perspective. But if Ethiopia stands a chance at being salvaged as a country, the primary or the secondary solution in country is multinational federalism, where regions have their own respected symbols, institutions, resources, autonomy over their and so on, while equally under a federal system. Other than that, I believe it's time for divestment, at least from a Somali woman's perspective, and let those who want to be Ethiopian, and
I think we have a problem, technical problem. Mohammed, is that true?
It's about her connection, the connection of internet connection of Hafsa. We can proceed from there.
Yeah, so I said basically from a woman's perspective, I believe anybody who wants to be Ethiopian, they can be Ethiopian, and anyone who doesn't want to be Ethiopian can be. Other than that, it's from a woman's perspective, they bear the brunt in terms of all the conflict and all the atrocities. So it's going to be a difficult way forward.
Hafsa, as you know, the UN, one of the officials, senior officials, Amina Mohammed went and visited Ethiopia and went to 4 regions almost a week ago, and she talked about something that we cannot even describe in words. Did you follow her perspective, and especially what this war and what kind of inhuman and horror inflicted on the women, particularly in Tigray region?
Yeah, women are often, of course, the most vulnerable members of the community. So our children, elders, and ostracized, and those who are differently abled. And of course, experiences of women right now in contemporary Ethiopia. I've seen Amina's visit to different regions. Of course, I was hoping she'd deliver more resources and aid to places, isolated or besieged places like Tigray or even Afar, but that did not happen. But whether a woman is from Somali, Oromo, Tigray, Beshangul, Amhara, Afar, or anywhere else, they're experiencing magnitudes of horror, separation, and violence. We all know who has it worse, of course, people right now in the Tigray region, but I do not view the experiences of women in Ethiopia other than a stain on the humanity and morality of everyone, especially those capable of commencing the end to their state-imposed pain and grief. So yeah, it's really, I wish there was more resources Amina or the UN could provide. We often see rhetoric, we often see promises and pledges from a federal government level, from the UN and other international organizations, but we never see concrete actions to support victims of rape, victims of other forms of violence in Ethiopia.
As you know, Hafsa, the problem of drought that is really worsening in Somali region, the brunt of all this is mostly affecting the woman. Can you also, shed light on that? And particularly, as you know, sorry to interrupt you, the war has devastated, the economy of Ethiopia. Right now is really, one of the lowest in terms of, according to the World Bank and other institutions. But mostly the rural and particularly the women are, the one that this war is affecting. And on top of that, we have this droughts. Can you talk about that? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, when it comes to, again, the drought that's happening in the Somali region, it's very unfortunate that there are resources available. We all know that there were resources allocated for the drought in the Somali region, and then it was reallocated and taken from the Somali region to commit atrocities in places like Western Oromia and in the Tigray region. It's really unfortunate that I wouldn't say it's an easy, of course, this drought is primarily due to climate change, but it's also because of corruption. It's also because of other factors such as the conflicts that are raging throughout the country. But when it comes to women, they are the first to die, the first to be displaced, the first to go without basic necessities such as shelter, food, and other things. So it's just really unfortunate. We're doing whatever we can, but more needs to be done. So that's what I could say.
Thank you. Dr. David Sheen, as you know, this war that is almost has now 16, months. It not only it's internal, civil war, but also it became internationalized, and it has a biggest, ramification not only in Horn of Africa but the Gulfs, and now it became even the superpower are fighting, namely, the Chinese, the Russian are there, Iranian, the drone of Turkey has been used. There is all kind of actors right now, especially fighting on, becoming part of, as I say, internationalized war. And as you know, there are more than 300 million people live in the Horn of Africa. And the Red Sea, it's affecting a lot in that area. Can you talk about, this kind of geopolitical, ramification that this war have, and what are the, these competing actors are, their interest?
You're quite right in that the civil war in Ethiopia has, to a considerable extent, been internationalized, at least in terms of outside players taking sides, and in some cases providing military equipment, as in the case of drones, for example. This is relatively common in these kinds of conflicts in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, most conflicts in the Horn have been internationalized over the years, some to a much greater extent than the current one in Ethiopia today. But it does complicate the situation. It would obviously be better if the outside forces only tried to do one thing, and that is bring peace to the region, rather than make it possible to aid and abet warfare on behalf of any party to the conflict. But unfortunately, this hasn't been the case, and the number of players is quite long. In some cases, their role is not that significant at the moment, but nevertheless, they've taken sides up to some extent, and this is making matters more difficult.
So, what's the role then? The superpower, particularly the U.S. and Chinese, are really right now in competing in that area?
Well, I think there's actually less competition between the U.S. and China in the Ethiopian conflict than a lot of the press is suggesting. The Chinese are trying to play a neutral role. They're trying to the extent possible, stay out of the conflict, although they clearly have a preference for the government in Addis Ababa. The United States has taken a position of trying to have a ceasefire is the first priority. The second priority is opening up Tigray to humanitarian access. And it has given the impression that it is favoring Tigray. I think that's not entirely fair, but nevertheless, that's the impression that the United States has given. From my standpoint, I think the United States is primarily interested in ending the conflict, period. The trouble is, whenever you impose sanctions on a country, it's always the established government that is most likely to be affected by sanctions. A rebel movement doesn't much become impacted by sanctions. It's just not the way sanctions work. So it does give the impression that the United States is favoring the Tigrayan side. Other international players like Russia have not played a particularly important role so far, but they could in the future, and that too would, in my view, be unhelpful. The goal is to end the conflict, end the fighting, and have all parties sit down and discuss this in some kind of a national dialogue involving all elements of Ethiopia, not just the Tigrayans and the government in Addis Ababa, but all elements of the country.
And as you know, Dr. David, government has imposed a sanction on Eritrea. And also there is another resolution that has been passed in the Congress called 6600. Can you talk on that point, those points?
Well, you're absolutely right. The United States has imposed individual sanctions on several important Eritrean officials, and there may be more sanctions that will occur in the coming months. The congressional proposal that you referred to has only been passed by a single committee in the House of Representatives in Washington. So it is not law. It has not become a fact at this point. It has to be passed by the entire House of Representatives, and then it has to be approved by the Senate before it ever goes to the White House. And at that point, it becomes only a resolution, as I understand it, or a proposal, which the White House, the president, could either accept or reject. So there's a long way to go with that congressional proposal before anything actually takes place with it.
As you know, Dr. David, the US is really engaged in Ethiopian, in Horn of Africa in general. And also they nominated currently, they also changed the special envoy there. The special envoy is shadowing, we can see, working also with the AU in the former president of Nigeria. They're working together. When you look at it, the national dialogue that is coming and how they are preparing, to usher to some kind of, lasting peace in that region, do you think they are achieving a concrete and tangible, points in order to make a ceasefire, then go, to the table and negotiate so that all the, different group stakeholder will incorporate it?
Well, since those of us on the outside don't have access to the discussions that are being led by the African Union, it's very difficult to answer that question because we don't know with any precision what is being discussed. I think the African Union is the appropriate organization for leading this effort under the aegis of former Nigerian President Obasanjo. I think he has some credibility, not only with the government in Addis Ababa, but with the officials in Tigray. So that's a good thing. And the United States is playing a supporting role. It's not playing the lead on this at all. And I think that also is appropriate. What's interesting to me is that the new special envoy of the United States, David Satterfield, has been surprisingly quiet about any discussions or meetings he has had in Addis Ababa or anywhere else for that matter. This is something of a different approach than his predecessor, who was holding more news conferences and discussing more of what was happening in these discussions. The fact that we're hearing almost nothing in terms of the actual meetings leaves those of us on the outside having to guess at what is being talked about.
Now I'm moving to Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman, my question to you is, how do you see the upcoming national, national dialogue, and I have seen it, a press release from your organization that you rejected, Can you speak to that?
Dialogue. Actually, we were the first to propose because we believe that is the only way out, unless we want just to return to the old, violence. But what we are rejecting is the way it's being managed. What we believe will be a neutral place where we can all come together and express our different views about the future of Ethiopia. And if the ruling party, which is just one party rule, dominates it, so what is the use of it? If they want to discuss among PP members, they can have their own dialogue separately. But if they want a dialogue between all key stakeholders, actually all the stakeholders, then the way they have approached it, we see is erroneous. And it just, we saw how the election happened. We saw how the country has been conducted for the last 3 years. So we have no confidence in the current process. And all we are saying is, it's not possible to conduct a genuine national dialogue in that way. So it has to be redrawn. The dialogue should, before the national dialogue, there should be pre-dialogue. We should talk about it. For example, I remember when they started this process, they called the political parties. I came from Jigjiga. I went there. This week, they told us, the Minister of Peace said, we have postponed the discussion for this week. I stayed another week, and then they postponed again for another week. I spent more than 20,000 birr in hotels, which is a lot of money in comparison to what is our needs. So what happened? And they just didn't. They said they never returned back to us. And the next day we heard the Parliament has set and promulgated a law for the national dialogue. And then suddenly we heard that they have already decided how the commission will be elected. They call all Ethiopia should send any names they want, which is a recipe for muddling the whole thing. When so 110 million people can nominate anybody they want. And then the next day we heard, for example, as Somalis, 1 month before the nomination of, we had the candidates now they have put on the roster for Somalis. So it's all a PP affair. If they control the commission that's going to hold the national dialogue, they will control the narrative, they will control the setting, they will control everything. And then it will be what is used for it. So we will not accept that. What we say is let key stakeholders who have got influence in their communities, who can affect the peace and war in this country, come together and reach a national dialogue. Also, no one should be excluded because they are fighting, because they are against the government or with the government. What we say, if it's a national dialogue, it means a national dialogue, inclusive, really inclusive. And that we need interlocutors, international interlocutors. We need a safe venue. There's no trust in the whole system. So that is the way we see the problem with this national dialogue. And even now we see the international community is getting involved. Even those who are doing that, they are not talking to everybody. They are either talking only to the warring parties and the government. So do they want us to go back to war so that they can talk to us? That's what is very strange. For example, the American never came many times to Addis Ababa. He never met the key parties, especially the parties who have got influence in the area. So what does it mean? Do they want us to go back again to war so that they can talk to us? That's another thing. So we are not, the even discussion in Ethiopia for the future of this country is being excluded. People are being excluded, and that will not take us very far. We believe national dialogue is very important. We believe the way forward is dialogue. We don't believe in violence, but it should be really a national dialogue that is owned by all. If it's owned by some parties, some nation, some group, it won't be a national dialogue. Why do we need national dialogue? Because the state system has failed. It's very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. As you nicely and eloquently put it, as we know, the definition even of national dialogue have, a potential to really be an instrument of political change, as you know. In South Africa, truth and reconciliation. In Burundi, it has brought a lasting solution. As you know, Somalis, we have this hair that has brought in many different areas, and especially the Gada system of, Oromo. Do you think this Kent area that within Ethiopia that we are considered as a periphery could play a major role, to inject some kind of peace in the process? We have been seeing all the time, the solution was just coming from the top, from the north to the south. What is your perspective on that?
OLF has, taken its political stand, which was very neutral. We were dealing with Abiy. We accepted to take part in the election until the last moment. We have been always playing a positive role, but unfortunately, that doesn't gel very much. We could play a role. We, for example, as Somalis, of course, we are not. We don't have big presence in the capital, but we are a key stakeholder in Ethiopia. We own 1/3 of Ethiopian territory. We own 1/3 of the Ethiopian population, and Ethiopia has always been a Somali territory. If you look at Haile Selassie, he had to create a big army to defeat Somalis. That made a coup against him. 7/7 war. That everybody was supported because of the Somali cause. And changes in Ethiopia always come usually through Somali region. So it's very important politically and militarily. The Somali Peninsula is very important. We've got the seas on our side, the Somalis. We have more than 35 million Somalis who probably most of them as people support our cause. So we are not as such periphery as some people would like to say. We always play a key role, but usually we are always sidelined when it comes to the Ethiopian future. Because some of them say we are secessionists, so we are not considered. Some of them believe that whatever they have their own labels. But anyway, I believe we could play a positive role, and we have been trying. We have been very much trying to play a positive role for the last 3 years. But our role, anyway, it depends on how the others perceive it. For example, the big powers are vying for power to become prime minister, to sit in the Addis Ababa seat. Usually, we are a bit different from that. What we want is we want to have a genuine autonomy, or maybe even to leave the country if they don't want us. If they don't want, because what they say, the land is ours and the people are not ours. That they say they have, it's very strange. I mean, even you see, mainstream media will say Somalis have come here a few centuries ago for grass in the Somali territory, which is actually ridiculous, very ridiculous. So we have got a role. We are really willing to play a positive role, and we could contribute. Somalis in Kenya have played such role. Somalis in Kenya now are very, very well integrated. They do a lot of things. So even that role is denied us. So they don't even listen to us.
Okay, my last question to you, Mr. Abdurrahman, is we are hearing a lot from the circle of Ethiopianist scholars, and mostly they talk about the biggest problem right now, the curse of Ethiopia, is ethnic politics, and especially Article 39 in their perspective. And as you know, Ethiopia, we have had many LF, liberation fronts. How do you reconcile these two extreme point of view? On the one hand, just the way we can put in the context also of that, two school of thought that I've asked Dr. Davis Shane. But do you think the ethnic, politics is a curse or is a blessing?
Well, we believe those who are advocating this are dreaming of the past glories. It's not going to come back. The way these ethnic federalism came was through the bloodshed of the people, the struggle that happened in Ethiopia, which is going on for almost a century. So that was a solution. But the problem is they're blaming. For example, if I spoke this before in Ethiopian, a meeting when the prime minister was there. If you buy a shining car, Ford or Lexus or whatever, or Toyota, and then you give it to a bad driver and they drive it and throw it over the bridge, the car is not to blame, it's the driver. The ethnic federalism which went wrong was not because of the tenets of the ethnic federalism or because of the Ethiopian constitution. It was in itself a model in the world. Although there are few things there which are not conductive, but in general, what went wrong is not ethnic federalism. It's the way that was managed. It's the way that was conducted. But to be frank with the way Ethiopia was formed by force. One ethnic group formed Ethiopia by force. Taking over, and still that hegemony is being wanted to be played again and again. That syndrome is there always. One group trying to dominate the rest, and that's why this is talking about. But what we believe is if they grant genuine devolution, Britain there's genuine devolution. Scottish have got their own government. The Welsh have got. The Irish have got. The problem. The problem there is it's not the type of government that is the problem. It's the attitude in Ethiopia. It's the outlook. It is this idea of archaic, feudal system that wants to, keep the people under hegemony. That's killing Ethiopia. It's not like federalism. It's an attitude. It's government said. The government owns the people. Everything, even bringing a car to Ethiopia is a problem. Making trade in Ethiopia is a problem. It's a whole setup. It was based on 19th century rules. It's not 21st century, 22nd century rules. So that is where the problem is. And the problem is, I own you. You can't talk. I will decide for you. We will never accept. We Somalis have got our own language, have got our culture, have got our history. We feel we have been, oppressed, marginalized. So we cannot trust someone to say that I'm going to create centralism and I don't have nothing on Addis Ababa. But what I can trust is what I say is let each nation rule itself. Let have got a common point there, and through time, and people will come together. You cannot easily create national consensus through just a rule of the through a stroke of the hand. The whole culture, democratic culture, has to develop. There's no democratic culture in Ethiopia. There's no rule of law. There's no human rights respect. Those issues have to be tackled first instead of blaming the ethnic federalism. So that's what I believe, and that's what we are saying. One group wants to turn back to 2050 to the Meniloko Haile Selassie period. We will not accept that. Or Mengistu period. One is still hegemony, the rest under the foot. It's not acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Abdurrahman. Hafsa, with respect of time, I will ask you the last question. As you know, there is you are the founding, of this organization, Empowering the Woman. So my question to you is, through this national dialogue that they are planning to hold, to bring, some kind of consensus, what do you think, a woman, role would be in that, arena?
Well, when it comes to the national dialogue, and if that is to actually follow through in order to find a lasting solution, a sustainable solution, to the ongoing nightmares in Ethiopia, the most impacted must be given the platform to express their visions for a healthier, more equitable, less violent country, wherein women are in leadership roles, women influence and create policies protecting fellow community members, women feel safe to do macro and micro levels of business without worrying about being raped or looted by some militia. Women must play a key role in any and every reconciliation plan. But from my personal, perspective, I believe that total divestment or complete inclusivity, like Dr. Abdurrahman was saying, either people come together under some sort of system, and that everybody has that level of equality and peace and autonomy to manage themselves, or people divest. So, but that's in the political sphere. But what I would like to see right now, at least for the Somali region, for other regions, is for this devastating drought and man-made famine in the Somali region to end, for there to be some sort of transitional administration, for the displacement atrocities in Oromia to stop, for the horrific humanitarian siege in Tigray region to be lifted and networks be immediately reconnected. So I feel like from a humanitarian perspective, I think that's the number one priority. Before any reconciliation plan, these problems need to be addressed.
So again, sorry, I say last question. When you look, the social media, the world has changed today through the internet. What would be the role, of women, especially, to make their voice? As we know, the woman was all along, the voice of the voiceless. Mm-hmm. Through this instrument, through this kind of medium of communication, what will be the role of women in order to bring, peace, and then especially, empowerment of women and other kind of, role you can play?
I think that women should be at the table. In every decision-making table, they should be given that space to address the specific concerns that they have, the violence that they're being impacted by. I feel like women should, social media and all these other tools definitely amplify the voices of women, or Ethiopian women, or people from the Horn of Africa. But I believe that in every effort to come in the near future, women should definitely be given a substantial amount of space to maneuver this crisis and to actually make decisions for the future.
Okay. Thank you so much for all the panelists. We will, with respect of the time, because David Sheen, we agree with him that he can leave anytime. He say he has another commitment. So Mohammed, this is a question and answer. We have to make brief. And as I say, Dr. David Sheen, you can leave any time that you feel like it in order to, fulfill your other commitment. So I'll pass.
Okay, I think Dr. Abdurrahman is muted. Can you please unmute?
To a mute microphone. So first of all, we urge the Ethiopian government and the Prime Minister, Mr. Abiy, to consider the voices of all those concerned. And I don't want to say that there's no hope or the country will be destroyed. What I say is there's a room for opportunity still. The international community is still trying to broker agreements among the warring parties. And we should also consider they also to put effort into the national dialogue. And the discussion is still ongoing. We are saying this is not the right way to do it. So as long as we are ready to participate, that door should not be closed by the government, because if they persist in making it unilateral, it means that door is closed. So, but unless a country will have national dialogue when all other system has failed. So if this national dialogue fails, then there will be what happens. You become a failed state, because unless all voices are heard in Ethiopia, the current system is not working. Whether they like it or not, the economy will worsen. The strife will reach everywhere. Things will get back. I've just now received a letter now from my colleague. 15 of our members who were there a few days ago to do their normal activities now in prison. So the whole political space is narrowing. And I see it narrows and narrows. When the dialogue stops, the next people will then turn to violence, which is not very good. So we hope our voice should be considered. We call the international community to put effort into also the national dialogue, not only the ceasefire or the droughts or the opening of humanitarian space, but on top of that, people to come together and talk. And so we call for the government to consider what they're doing. We call also all friends of Ethiopia, wherever they are, to also work on this issue. And we hope there will be an opening for dialogue. But at the moment, it looks like we are stuck in a rut.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abdurrahman. I would like to pass to Yasser Said.
Hello, everyone. I hope you guys can hear me clearly. My question, I have two quick questions in respect for the shortage of time. My questions are directed towards Ambassador Shin. The first one is, Ambassador Shin, in your opinion, who guarantees the outcome of the dialogue that it will be implemented, that the outcome of the dialogue be implemented? And also, is there a need for shuttle diplomacy due to the mistrust amongst the conflicting parties?
Yes, you were partially broken up, but I think I got the gist of your question, which concerns the possibility of shuttle diplomacy involved. And I assume that's in connection with moving forward with the national dialogue. Maybe it's a broader question. I'm not quite sure what you had in mind there, but the whole issue of shuttle diplomacy, I think arguably is already underway. I think you could argue that former Nigerian President Obasanjo has been doing exactly that, at least between Tigray and Addis Ababa. Now, whether there has been any effort by the African Union or by Obasanjo to talk with other groups in Ethiopia, I'm not aware of. And if there has not been an effort to reach out to other groups, obviously that needs to happen. It's important, as Abdurrahman already suggested, that you have to reach out to all of the major groups in the country if you're going to have a successful national dialogue. You cannot isolate it to simply the Tigrayans and the people in power in Addis Ababa. But the concept of shuttle diplomacy, I think, is actually already happening.
Okay, thank you, Dr. David Sheen. I think Mukhtar is
I had a question for them.
Continue with Mukhtar, please. Continue with Mukhtar.
Mukhtar, could you please continue?
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panel for giving me this opportunity. Actually, I have just one question, but my question is a bit, this national dialogue is a bit vague from the onset, because when this commission was established, I remember in the parliament, the Legal and Administrative Affairs Committee chair, Segenet Mengistu, when she was asked that are they intending to invite the armed group, she clearly said that there's no article in the document, the proclamation document, stating that there's no any article or word in the document about negotiation. So from the onset, the establishment of this commission, so-called national dialogue, was a bit vague, because she clearly said there's no any negotiation in the word. So one asks, what is the purpose of national dialogue if it doesn't involve the any negotiation of the warring parties? Because these are the people who are fighting, and once they agree and you know, delay the fundamental principle or the basic for this commission, I think things can be resettled. But now, from the onset, it was clear, and she said that it doesn't involve any negotiation. It is just a national dialogue. So just the vagueness of the whole thing, a bit, you know, sometimes tell the person maybe the whole thing was intended for just easing the you know, the diplomatic and economic pressure for Abiy. So it wasn't a honest and a genuine dialogue. So I just wanted to ask the ambassador that I hope the international community, the diplomats, are aware of this vagueness and all this, you know, deception from the onset. It was not intended to bring the people together, but it was just a way of, you know, easing the diplomatic and economic pressure for Abiy government. Thank you.
I'll just respond quickly to that. I think Mukhtar makes a very valid point. I think there is concern that so far the discussion about a national dialogue has been much too vague. There certainly is no specificity involved that I have seen. And I too have been concerned that it may be more of an effort to curry favor with the international community. And until such time as there are specifics and there is a seriousness shown by particularly the government in Addis Ababa that they will move forward with a meaningful national dialogue, then we're not advancing the cause of peace very much. So I think this is a very legitimate concern, and I think it's a warning that is properly issued to the international community.
Okay, thank you, Dr. David Shane. Anyone else? You can raise your hand for a question.
Right.
Mohammed Zakaria.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Muhammad Sheikh, and the moderator, calling my friend Dr. Ismail. I got the invitation from one of my colleagues at Congress for Somali Concern. And I would like just to ask Ambassador Shen, with respect to the national dialogue that's going on in Ethiopia right now. Basically, a national dialogue, one of the values and the principles to succeed are the integrity and inclusiveness and the democratic and rule of law, human rights. All these elements have to be functional in order in a country for a national dialogue to succeed. If we look at Yemen and look at Sudan, we look at a number of countries where the national dialogue has failed and got into a civil war, there were governments, authoritarian governments, under which the basic human rights were not respected. And what we have seen in Ethiopia, we had hoped in 2018 when Dr. Abiy came in and there was a political space for all the political parties, opposition parties, released, political prisoners. Probably that kind of environment was conducive to have a national dialogue to succeed. But currently what we see is the internally displaced people, war, imprisonment, and especially, the free speech, journalists' imprisonment, all those kinds of things. Do you think when we see all this, that this national dialogue could be considered as dead on arrival, or as the International Peace Center definition, that national dialogue, sometimes these authoritarian governments, they use it and misuse it and manipulate it to strengthen their power? And how do you see it in absence of all these elements that's required for a national dialogue to succeed? Do you think Ethiopia will do good? Thank you.
I think Mohammed raises a very valid point, and one in which many Ethiopians have a concern as to where this national dialogue is heading. I have some concerns about it. I'm not convinced at this juncture that everyone is being adequately serious about it. Having said that, one needs to give it a chance. If one begins with the premise that it is dead on arrival, then it clearly has no hope of succeeding. It is obviously a failure before it begins. So I don't begin with that premise, but I do begin with a premise of great deal of concern, and we need to see more seriousness by all of the parties who are involved in it, and particularly the central government.
Mohammed, for giving me this opportunity. One last question to conclude. I wanted to ask the ambassador that we know that we make some mistake in the previous by giving Abiy a Nobel Prize for a cause that was not, related to peace, because when he started negotiating with Eritrea, many people perceived that the whole cause was a peace process, and as a result of that cause, he was given this Nobel Peace. And now this so-called national dialogue, more or less, it looked like there's a similarity of that and this, because now it seems that it's not a union. It's just like sort of, he's doing sort of preparation, regrouping, preparation and training of more military. But for the international community and just any other lay person may think the cause is good, and people are trying to appreciate and welcome. But in reality, there's a lot of conscription of military, buying of arms. So I'm just asking, are we making the same mistake in the name of this national dialogue? Are we making the same mistake that resulted Abiy to be given the National Peace Prize? Are we making the same mistake? Thank you.
Mukhtar, I obviously don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what is going on in the mind of the Prime Minister. But I would put the matter this way. I would say that this is a wonderful opportunity for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to prove his critics wrong and to actually move forward with a serious national dialogue, to truly reach out to all of the groups in the country, bring them into the process, and show that he is serious. That would be the best answer to the question. Now, we'll find out soon enough whether he is willing to do that or not. And a number of you have already pointed out your concerns about this and your thought that perhaps he's not serious about it. And you may very well be right. But this is the time for Abiy Ahmed to prove otherwise. So the burden is on him, and it's on his government to do that.
Okay, on behalf of Horn of Africa Policy Center, we have to thank you, Dr. David Shin, Dr. Abdurrahman Made, and also our sister Hafsa, and also the rest of participants. And we thank you very much again. And we have concluded our forum today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.